welcome back. So I'm gonna go through another Twitter thread, a bunch of articles that I've been reading, and stuff I underlined. So throw that on there. This is music by Dark Burden. Actually, by the person who posted it, which is cool. Okay, so I started looking at this. It's called the Emperor Trough up in. So I was looking at that, but I guess we should refresh this. Sure. So here's the Emperor Hawaiian Seamount chain. And then next to the Emperor portion is the Emperor Trough. And I'm just like, okay, what do we got on this area? What can I find here? So I started looking around. And there's a very curious feature near the Emperor Hawaiian Seamount chain called the Emperor Trough, or Emperor Fracture Zone, I think it's also called, dependent on interpretation, that has been considered a, quote, spreading center, but does not have features that would be expected with a similar shape to Mariana Trench. So that's kind of what is most interesting to me. Here's a Mariana Trench. Here's the Emperor Trough. Both of them have like a straight portion, and then a curved portion. And if we look at the magnetic anomaly map of Earth, here's the Mariana Trench. And in the past, I've pointed out that the boundary of Mariana Trench down here, if we follow back this way, it goes to here and then up this way, up this way, up this way, and then the portion up here goes down this way, down to the top of the Mariana Trench. So there's a current flow that comes in here at this width that bends around resistance relating to the mantle puncture hole down here. So I won't go into too many details. Hopefully anyone watching this has seen other episodes before this, because I don't want to just constantly recap. It's just, I mean, maybe it's beneficial too, but at the same time, it's also a time investment at the beginning of each of these, where current flow went across here, interacting with the Mariana Trench region and seemingly like protruding it, so it's not just like straight across, but extends. And if we go over here, the mantle puncture hole up this way, across, like at this bottom boundary across, it even seems to maybe be related to possibly the top of the Mariana Trench region up here, all the way up here in Maine. I don't know if that's still considered the Mariana Trench up by Japan, but it goes from Pakistan across below the Himalayas, like this way, and across here to here. Himalayas are like here, start here and go down across this way, but they're above this boundary, which is pretty close to here, like down here. So it's basically going across below the Himalayas and bending up this way. So it's got a upper relationship to the mantle puncture hole, a lower relationship, particularly this whole wedge thing, this whole arc, related to current flow coming in under Asia and bending this way. Some of it goes left and bends over here and flows into the Kursk magnetic anomaly. Some of it continues this way, probably. And interacts with the mantle puncture hole pressure to bend around it. So basically, it comes in added. Here's the mantle puncture hole. Here's where it's coming in up here, added, but it bends by the resistance of the pressure down here and goes around it instead. It goes around it. And stuff coming more at it bends like right before it at the highest pressure, where this system like this exists here that swirls outward. So there's like a boundary, upper boundary to this swirl that's in the same shape as this, but larger. Over here, that kind of is like a space where current is generally flowing that way, is how I look at it. And maybe this generally directs over to here to like cut through this portion of this wall that was forming and physically flows in this way. Okay, so there's that going on. Where over here though, here's the other one, which is in the distance here. So here again, mantle puncture hole, current flowing this way, which is what the blue is where current flowed, where the pink is where current compacted material. So it flowed this way over here to about here, where it runs into another current coming opposite over this way. And that current bends possibly some other relationships from things over here, pressure up here, current flow that way that's participating in the bending. But then it seemingly causes it to like vibrate here. So it goes through this vibration of Shatsky rise up through here, down through here to Hess rise, and accumulates material against resistance in each instance. But it has a general boundary similar to the Emperor Trough over there, as well as seemingly like an upper relationship to it. So it seems like there's some kind of relationship between this boundary here and the undercurrent flowing from the mantle puncture hole. So I just started looking into this. This is also called the Chinook Trough here. I forget what this is called. These are fracture zones. Fracture zone, fracture zone, fracture zone, which we'll come across as we go forward. So that just, in short, is why I was looking at this. So I pulled up some research. I came across this. It's on Portal G-Plates. Notice portalgplates.org. Portalgplates.org. So it's this website where the magnetic anomaly map is from. So I found, like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, what do they got to say? Notice this is a little newer. Emperor Fracture Zone. Unlikely to represent an extinct ridge. So Memerix and Sharman, 1988, suggested the Emperor Trough may have been one arm of an extinct triple junction spreading center between the Kula Pacific Farallon plate boundaries prior to anomaly C34. Although they note that lineations cannot be unambiguously identified on either side of the fracture zone. So like these things on either side of the fracture zone, there's no these things like there. So that these things, these lineations, or whatever exactly the pronunciation is, pardon me, I know I'm probably saying things wrong all the time, but that's because I read them. But there's no such things opposite this trough, so it kind of points away from the interpretation of a spreading center. Does not have features that would be expected of a spreading center, such as these lineations. difficult to conceive of the structures anything other than, so because we can't envision anything other than something that is like other things, then we'll just interpret it in the same vein. Later works have provided more detail regarding the development of Shatsky Rise, and it is likely that the former Pacific Farallon plate is obscured within the volcanic plateaus to the west rather than at the Emperor Fracture Zone. So then, Atwater et al., 1993, were not convinced that the Emperor Fracture Zone is an extinct spreading center. However, they consider whether secondary spreading may have occurred along this fracture zone due to plate rupturing tearing. Which, tearing of, mind you, this Western Pacific was under North America like this, generally speaking, starting all the way over at Florida, under Mexico in this region, physically below the crust, and it slid out as the Earth expanded because it doesn't function under plate tectonics. But instead, the Earth expanded by the undercurrents that flowed out from the mantle puncture hole in all directions that shaped the entire globe in its magnetic anomaly maps. And so when this flowed out, like, I'm thinking maybe there's some relationship up here to this straight segment and then like a bend around Yellowstone area, which is here, to this Emperor Trough. So like the trough itself perhaps relates to this path that I've talked about in depth here, that goes in a very straight line and it continues all the way back here subtly, like through here, through here, through here, through here, through here, through here, and then it starts to kind of vibrate. But it generally goes this way over to here at Flathead Reservation. And this is related to the accretion of the terrains of British Columbia onto the Wrench as North America grew to be North America. As these terrains were pushed against it, which then closed a pathway for water to flow, and that water ended up etching this very straight path through here, which is, if we look at the Emperor Trough, very straight, and then it arcs like it at this corner where it like, it's almost like there's it's flowing against a resistance region, and then it gets past that resistance and bends by essentially a cross current flowing this way, which is related to the Shatsky Rise and Hess Rise and Palatine Ridge, or whatever this is called. These ridges that are all part of the same current flow interacting with the other current flow this way, flowing this way, interacting with current flow across this way, and creating this like vibratory structure here that then induces mounds in the region. Mounds which cause the continents to separate in ways so that the Earth can actually expand by breaking the continents apart, by uplifting them, kind of thing. So when it says tearing specifically made me think of this, like tearing, this current cutting down into the Earth sufficiently to physically go into this underlayer that is the Pacific plate, Western Pacific plate, that's forming underneath North America. It's forming underneath Australia, Philippines, and all these islands, forming underneath this. Here's Solomon Islands, which was adjacent to Mexico. It's forming underneath here as well. Like right, Australia's basically here, where this eye of the world is, as I call it, with all these circles in it that are in the data, where Australia's boundaries were these islands. Real quick, which were here. I know if you haven't seen this is fast, but sorry, I show this like every time. Which were here, and then the bonds between them broke physically, creating the nuances of there, as well as the seafloor itself there and there. Participating in that shaping, at least, that final result. But this current continues, and then here, maybe it arcs out. Like, maybe it arcs out to Bighorn and around that way as the Emperor troughs shape. So that's kind of what I was just generally thinking. Let me see where it arcs out. Being where it starts to arc out. Being like here. That would put the Chinook trough kind of extending out this way. So if we go to my, I don't think I've saved this yet, to Hess Rise, North America. If we go to this, maybe not this one, but Hess Rise, North America, one, not this one, this one, this one. So that's kind of where I put that actually, which is good. That's a good sign. So generally a current flow going down and then bending, although it looks like I was thinking more like that. But then that removes Hess Rise from being adjacent to the center of the Colorado Plateau, which I really wanted to hinge it from. So maybe there's some reason for them being a little off in that regard. Like, I kind of feel like it was like that based on connecting the Emperor Trough to North America and the Chinook Trough. Still in the works, but okay. Before I get too distracted though, so basically when I saw this, I was like, oh, not convinced. What do they have to say? So I looked up this paper. I'm pretty sure soon after we're gonna get to that paper, but I guess not right away. Here's a paper by Ian Norton with the area labeled extensively, so I just kind of thought this was highly useful because they label the area. Hess Rise, Shatsky Rise, Emperor Chain, Hawaiian Chain of the Emperor Hawaiian Seamount Chain, Emperor Trough, Chinook Trough, something, maybe Aleutian Fracture Zone, Superior Fracture Zone, I forget, Molokai Fracture Zone, I feel like, but I thought that was down here further. Fracture Zone, so these are just the Fracture Zone lines. Powell Fracture Zone, maybe. Something Ridge, whatever that is. Whatever those are with the S's. We can probably just open it up from this link. So this is called Speculations on Cretaceous Tectonic History of Northwest Pacific and a Tectonic Origin for the Hawaii Hotspot. So if we go here, figure one. Lots of good images in this paper. But maybe the only place that says figure one. Trying to find the actual terms. Let's say I don't feel like NS is gonna find a lot of things unless I put a space before it. Space NS. There it is. Non-surveyor feature. Here we go. That's right. I took an image of this. So if we go forward, here's all the meanings of these things. So if you're interested, feel free to just look at the paper and find it, or whatever means you want to do. Pioneer fracture zone, Surveyor fracture zone, Murray fracture zone. All these things. Marcus wake chain, which is interesting because it approaches the mid-Pacific Mountains. This ridge, NR, is going to come up later, Necker Ridge, which, just for reference, if we go back to this animation, here, the reason this animation came about is because I basically, we'll say, realized the mid-Pacific Mountains, which are here, formed abutting this undercrust of North America, possibly at a lower level, but still interacting with it. And here in this region is the New Madrid fault line. So it's my interpretation that a piece of the mid-Pacific Mountains physically moved out from under North America, but in so doing, they basically connected to Necker Ridge, which was a extensional segment of crust underneath this region of North America, which is where the New Madrid fault line is. So it's my interpretation that the New Madrid fault line is the result of Necker Ridge moving out, this here NR moving out from under the terrain and creating a void, which then led to instabilities. So there's that. Here's another image where they have the magnetic isochrones lineations numbered. I believe, I'm not completely sure how to interpret these, because older numbers are considered younger or older. Higher numbers are considered older, sorry, where like 0 is approaching present. So I'm not sure what to make of this. There might be something more going on here. Magnetic lineations in the North Pacific labeled with chron numbers, which is what those numbers are. Isochron. Japanese and Hawaiian lineations of the M sequence are mostly west of the Hawaiian Emperor Seamount chain. They are numbered without the M prefix, so maybe, I guess M sequence, there's more than one sequence. I guess the M sequence is Mesozoic, and maybe this is Cenozoic. And it would be labeled with a C, maybe, and differentiating between M and C, like M0 is before C34, maybe. I'm not completely sure what to make of specifically this region, especially if we look at it. I was thinking about it, like maybe this current flow that went up this way was contributing to this here. Like, noticeably, there's something I noticed that I don't think I mentioned in the comments of this Twitter thread, is that this goes up and then it bends, sharp bend, like over here, sharp bend, where it goes this way and then this way, like it's running into resistance here. So I was thinking maybe this region was related to current flows going out this way that are physically flowing into this and pressuring it to bend. So it bent, where over here it didn't, and it just kept flowing this way, because these are probably more related to currents applying. Sorry, my phone's blowing up. What's that mean? I'll get back to you. Have some interesting other stuff been talking about today with Gary. Like, it looks like this region was kind of like physically attached over here, maybe, essentially, and this just broke away and slid over. So it was over there. Like, if we look at these lines going up this way, and these going up this way, like these are kind of out of place. They're not really connected. It reminds me of over here, this region is not really connected. Where, what I mean connected, I mean this region where the angel is, that has wings of a magnetic field figure 8 structure around a nucleus that then has jet streams coming out of it like a gamma ray out of the pole that then turns into like a trident structure, which in the last one we noticed its boundary over here was the Manihiki Plateau, which is considered to have separated from Ontong Java Plateau because this thing's current flows segmented it and then went out like a trident and pushed the parts apart, as well as pushing Hikarangi apart down here, plateau over here in this region. Got pushed apart from this nucleus region where all the segments were once together, but then this started to form and it grew. Like, it wasn't instantaneously this large, it had to grow to be this large. So initially all the plateaus around it were actually together, but then it started to create these jet streams and this trident structure that went up, and this went through Baja California region and created the Gulf of California, and the nose of the dragon was here, which is this one. The main current went to the nose of the dragon, but then it bends because the earth expanded, so the direction of current bent. But up here it's actually going still upward in this region, so it's almost suggestive that there's something older here. Like, this is maybe older than I realize. Which this is younger than it's dated in terms of based on magnetic line anomaly lines. We have concluded this is older, and it's just mapped that way typically, but it's actually younger. Although there is some evidence that there's some older crust, basement crust, but it's definitely covered at least in Cretaceous crust in this region. And possibly based on drill samples, they didn't find Jurassic, but they might not have drilled deep enough to find the Jurassic crust underneath thick layers of Cretaceous in this area. So it's not fully clear whether there's any Jurassic under all this, or if this kind of like opened up in the Cretaceous in essence. And it's related, like the materials in there relate to the Ontong Java Plateau, Manihiki, and Hikarangi Plateau in terms of their geochemistry and things, where they're more related to those than they are to the Jurassic crust that would be expected. So there's certainly lots of things going on here. Okay, so here's I just thought this was good for its labels. So there's that one, and then I got the Atwater, the paper of the first one, and pretty much all these posts are from this paper. So that I really looked through this paper, as described by Atwater et al., which the paper can be found at this link. Fracture zone traces across the North Pacific Cretaceous Quiet Zone and their tectonic implications. So the North Pacific Cretaceous Quiet Zone is actually in this region up here. Not sure exactly its boundaries, but in this region. This is the Jurassic Quiet Zone. This is the North Pacific Cretaceous Quiet Zone region, where what quiet zone really means is the magnetic anomalies are not so distinct as they are here. Here they're pronounced so that it's considered not quiet, but here they're much more like chaotic looking in essence. They're very circular though, like we can see rings for sure throughout them. Over here, especially that one and this one, some there, maybe there, like a bunch of rings though up here. As if this was like a boiling eruption center where the crust itself got remade as a Cretaceous and doesn't have Jurassic visible in as much, if at all. Possibly it got like reset to a Cretaceous time where any Jurassic materials mixed enough in the radioactive materials or the dating methods were reset so that anything used to date shows Cretaceous time, even though there's materials that were present there at the Jurassic, possibly. Unclear. So here's another image, though, from Atwater with Chinook Trough there, Emperor Trough again, Emperor Chain, some fracture zone over there, Wagner, Mendocino, that's the M up there, Murray, there's the Malachi. Mendocino up here, fracture zone, which is closely related to the Powell fracture zone, which is closely related to the Pioneer fracture zone. These have in the past been labeled just Mendocino. Also mentioning in the past, this paper is from 1993. I really don't see anything after 2000, even early 90s. There's very little research that I found on the Pacific of this nature where they're like actively drilling. It's very much more just analysis, if anything, and that is more specific areas and not overall analysis. There's Necker Ridge again, Horizon Ridge, Mid-Pacific Mountains, Sculpin Ridge, which is maybe there, or part of the Mid-Pacific Mountains, Clarion Fracture Zone, so there's a bunch of fracture zones. If we go back here. So this is the Mendocino Fracture Zone with the Powell Fracture Zone with the Pioneer Fracture Zone. And then Malachi Fracture Zone down here, Clarion Fracture Zone, and then between the Murray Fracture Zone here, and then Clipperton Fracture Zone. Okay. The lack of magnetic isochrons in the quiet zone, Cretaceous normal superchron, leaves us with relatively little information about the late Cretaceous history of the central North Pacific. Because we depend on these magnetic isochrons to really infer things, because we're thinking in plate tectonics, like tectonic history, not just the history, but the plate tectonic history, where we've come to conclusions that these magnetic anomalies represent spreadings. Like, there's spreading that these show, but then that doesn't fit the data everywhere, so we kind of just have these weird things we can't explain because we're thinking in plate tectonics when the Earth expanded, and plate tectonics is false. It is clear that a number of important and interesting events occurred in the North Pacific during the Cretaceous. A number of very voluminous volcanic eruptions occurred in Manihiki, Ontong, Java, Hess Rise, etc., leading people to postulate, Larson et al., to postulate the establishment of a superplume in the area. So people, to explain these large voluminous volcanic events of these plateaus, essentially there's an upwelling from the mantle, but it doesn't really, like, that's a simple explanation, but it's a false one because it's not actually what happened. The undercurrents flowing below the crust from the mantle puncture hole collided in these locations and created mounds and building of material that are now seen as these things. So there is no such thing as this superplume below that is feeding directly upward, like bubbling up and creating these volcanic eruptions. That's not a thing that happened. These are caused by colliding currents under the crust that are still able to be traced in the magnetic anomaly map, like that flowed out this way, out this way, out this way, out this way, under North America, and interacted with an overlying ocean to a point where it solidified the material enough to create this structure, and then it went around it and underneath it and created the Western Pacific. And then it interacted with itself, flowing in the opposite direction, not this way, but this way, and into the Pacific, as well as with currents that flowed to the northern region of the Earth up here, that then went in here and into the Pacific ultimately, that are all interacting from a under the crust, but not deep in the mantle. It's sourced from the mantle, but it's flowing under the crust and colliding in these regions. The Kula plate was formed probably by, quote, the breaking off of the northern Pacific plate near the end of this time period, when of the Cretaceous. Near the end of the Cretaceous, the Pacific plate broke off. Northern Pacific plate broke off of something. It broke away from something, which I have described as being literally breaking away from the undercrust of North America, like this. Like it was over here, and it broke away and slid over here, basically. As the Earth expanded, it moved away, and then in between them, the Kula crust. Where was I? Oh no, there it is. The Kula plate was formed as a result, as it filled in the space between. The plate boundary between the Pacific and Farallon plates continued spreading through the supercron. I'm not sure what to make of that exactly. Let's see, Farallon plate images. In terms of its present position, it's really only over there, I guess. Here we go. I think it's only right there. Offsets across the transform faults were greatly altered by some spreading center jumps of unknown location and timing, and the spreading system was lengthened greatly to the south. Like where this was happening. Where this started as like a small center where currents were flowing to, but then it started to grow until it created a physical field that started to push its boundaries out, and then led to a greater growth. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure if that's where they're talking about. So the next post, this is a pretty long thread, so let's see. Pretty long thread, so let's get going. They describe a change in relative motion of Pacific Farallon that led to, quote, a distinct bend in all the northeast Pacific fracture zones around 83 to 79 million years. Major change in the occurred during Cron 33R, which is the reverse magnetic period preceding Cron 33, about 79 to 83 MA, leaving a distinct bend in all the northeast Pacific fracture zones. So some kind of bending occurred at that time, as if the crust started to separate, which led to different directions of propagation of energy. Essentially, maybe out into the open space of this region, like as the plates slid away from one another, the segments of the crust slid away from one another. There was a gap between them, forming where a current could easily flow. So pressure from just like the weight of the continents pushing down on this undercurrent of magmatic flows allowed it to just flow out towards this gap and fill in the space, forming the eastern Pacific region more easily, leading to a bend, as well as probably just physically, like, because it's a smaller globe, it didn't just have exact same angles throughout the expansion process. Okay. Describe that many Pacific fracture zones consist of groups of nearly parallel linear strands. Multi-strand configuration results from configuration where a ridge transform system consists of two or more transform fault segments linked by one or more short spreading center segments. This configuration is common in presently active Pacific transform systems and appears to have been the rule during the Cretaceous superchron. Nearly all of the fracture zones reported in this paper are multi-stranded. So if we look at this, like, it's multi-stranded. We look at this, multi-stranded. That might just be in the data there, but that's not. Multi-stranded there is essentially what it's getting at, and then there's a bend. So if we look at these, it goes kind of this way, this way, this way, this way at this segment, but then it goes down, more down across, a little bit down at least, and then it's more sideways, more east-west, northeast, southwest kind of direction here, east northeast really, and then east, and then east northeast, east northeast, east, east northeast, east northeast, east, east northeast, east northeast, east, east northeast. Is what they're saying. So there's a bend at that time frame. There's me just circling the fracture zones. Of notes, two of the fracture zones above points to the locations where bonds between Papua New Guinea and Mexico broke, while the others relate to the boundaries of Sulawesi, North Maluku, and Philippines, indicating a relationship to their breakup process. So if we go back here, it was like this. These were all conjoined to Australia, which were then conjoined to North America, like this. And if we look this way, this fracture zone is continues to there. So let's just go look at the map itself. This fracture zone continues to this boundary where the bond of Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, on the eastern part of Papua New Guinea, broke from North America. And then the western bond of Papua New Guinea connects back to this fracture zone, showing a relationship. Like, this is not an accidental location. This is not, they're related to these fracture zones. And then the boundary of North Maluku Sulawesi to that fracture zone, at least. This one's a little through Philippines. Although, I mean, this is not exact, so certainly it could be some nuance that I'm not accounting for, like spreading here where this was connected initially, but then it's spread up to like that boundary, and this gap, this was a physical gap between the two as they began to separate from Australia and each other. And if we keep going down the coast, we can keep going down here. Here's another fracture zone, which goes to this wrinkly thing here, as well as this bend. Another here that generally goes to this one. This really big bond breaking, which I recently put a Hiko or Manihiki plateau. Like, I believe it was related to this. And then down here, it's a little harder to see. There's a big old bond broken down there, but there. These are definitely related to the fracture zones. That's what I'm getting at. As well as just this boundary of the Juan de Fuca fracture zone, or whatever. Whatever this is called exactly, I forget. Ridge. Maybe. Okay, the fracture zones are described as being subtle in older crust. As if, so this is my initial interpretation. I don't know if this is fully viable. As if it had more time to harden before the currents inducing said fracture zones were able to influence them, while younger oceanic crust was more malleable and able to be shaped by the strong trident currents. So if we go back here, this trident is shaping these younger crust as it's forming. Like, that's the thing. Plate tectonics thinks millions of years, but that's not actually true. This all was the global flood, like, was the expansion process. And but it still had time for this region to form. So it's possible that the western regions are more subtle. So if we go here, topographical signatures of the fracture zones that cross the quiet zone are subtle. Further east, where they cross the relatively young seafloor of the northeastern Pacific, the major fracture zones dominate the topographic chart. The traces of those fracture zones extend westward into the quiet zone, but they become steadily more subdued as they cross increasingly older crust, as if it was more solidified at the time this current was going through it, that it just went over top it and didn't really shape the crust as much. Maybe etched into it, but it didn't really like flow through it like enough to actually flow between still forming crust that had yet to like solidify in a more final state. The seafloor in the quiet zone is believed to be about 83 to 119 million years old, which is really up until the Hawaiian Emperor Seamount chain began, just about, and then starting at when the Ontong Java Plateau, Ontong Java Nui complex, and everything related to it really started to happen. Additional topographical noise has been added by other late Cretaceous features, such as the Chinook and Emperor troughs to the north. So, late Cretaceous, Chinook and Emperor troughs. So, mind you, that's the Emperor trough, Chinook trough, late Cretaceous, like approaching the KT boundary when the Earth really rapidly began to expand, requiring first the severing in the late Cretaceous of the Western Pacific from the underbelly of North America so that it could freely expand apart from it. Late Cretaceous has rise in this other ridge in the center and mid-Pacific Mountains and Sculpin Ridge to the south, which are also described as late Cretaceous, although I know mid-Pacific Mountains date back to early Cretaceous as well, and so I'm not completely sure what is the consensus age of the mid-Pacific Mountains. Finally, the Cenozoic Hawaiian Emperor chain and its associated swells, moats, volcanism, and sedimentation have been superimposed upon the older seafloor structures, as if there was a seafloor structure there. And then this Hawaiian Emperor seamount chain formed after by a sphere, a ball that was forming in the currents here that then got pushed up this way, ejected out over here, ended up over here ultimately, and then rolled back in the currents atop the crust that had already formed, forming superimposed upon the older seafloor structures. Okay, let's keep going. The major fracture zones can be seen quite clearly crossing the survey lines in Figure 2. On the topographic profiles, they appear as linear groupings of subtle ridges, troughs, and steps. They are small, so the fracture zones topographically are subtle. They are small and somewhat discontinuous. And then they say, ironically, these fracture zones, so named because of their topographic expression, show up much more clearly in the magnetic profiles. So they're much more clear in the magnetic profiles. Mind you, I don't think these are even recognized, even in spite of them being in the magnetic profiles. Certainly this has not been connected to these, even though this current goes this way and this way. It's all one. This goes this way and goes that way. These go over here that way, over here that way. Possibly there's another... Really, I don't... related that way. We'll get to that though. Additionally of note, the fracture zones are flanked by abyssal hills, generally aligned perpendicular to the fracture zones. Abyssal hills. So it's just abyssal hill ocean. Just hills, I guess, in the ocean. Which to me, the hills are an indication of turbulence as this current passes through what would otherwise have been more of just like a flat sheet. The current passes through, and creates turbulence perpendicular to the flow direction of the current, which then leads to these abyssal hills perpendicular to the fracture zones, commonly curving as it approaches them. As again, the fracture zones being a current flowing through this fabric of the overall ocean floor as it flows in, and then this cross current flows through. It bends, commonly curving as it approaches them. These are hills that are generally perpendicular, but as they approach the current path, possibly in both directions like this, I believe these paths don't go just one way. Like, part of the reason they're like this is because there's current flow, like a road, like a two-way road, this way and this way in the same general region, going both to and from this system over here. But nuances would probably indicate that better. Like, notice these are curving, although perpendicular, but then curving, where this one actually looks maybe like it's going that way, but this side goes this way, this side goes this way, indicating like there's a top side of this current flowing generally westward, and there's a bottom side going eastward. That kind of thing, where maybe sometimes the two directions are so like running into each other, like bumping into one another, that they space apart and flow at a distance. More so like over here maybe is going on. I haven't looked specifically everywhere. Okay. Map of fracture zones. So here's just a map of the fracture zones. Mid-Pacific Mountains. Possibly final islands of Hawaii. No. I don't know what that was. I'm not sure what that is. It must be labeled somewhere. Emmy, Mendocino. Oh, that's just the fracture zones. They even show them bending down. Just don't recognize that they connect through the Jurassic Quiet Zone over to here. As well as this chunk was down here to really make these go this way. And then this got shoved over here in these currents as the Ontong Java Plateau formed. It shoved a chunk of like pre-forming, but not so formed as to be solidified and connected to this region completely. It got shoved away as the Ontong Java Plateau formed in this region. So then those connect back to there. Again, so this is where another figure from Atwater depicting magnetic isochrons. I just thought it was a good picture, really. The isochrons we can see over here. See, these are M12, M20. These are probably Cretaceous isochrons. That's my guess, is these 33, 32 are actually Cretaceous. Even though and when I was looking at this, I thought this was M33 equivalent, which would mean 150 to 160 million. But I said I might be mistaken on inferring ages because I feel like something's up with this. So I'm pretty sure it is that these are Cretaceous. I'll have to verify sooner or later. It's kind of hard finding certain information, like specific things. Cretaceous isochron map. I don't want to get distracted. We're already in an hour. Oh my god. Oh lord. That means this is probably about over, huh? Hope it was good. Okay, where are we at? Okay. Describe Pioneer and PAL fault zones as parallel to each other, but not to others. So this was interesting. With similar shapes but 1,000 kilometers offset, so they are rarely parallel, demonstrating groups of fracture zones to be an important feature. So generally, historically, these have just all been called fracture zones. And then this was the Mendocino one, but they realized that there's fracture zones in this region that could be subsets of the region that actually are not parallel, where all the Mendocino, this one down here, this one, these are all generally parallel, but the PAL and Pioneer are not parallel with the others, but instead they're parallel with one another, which to me just indicates they happened at a different time, but from the same general current flows, just at a different time. Once the Earth had expanded, then it led to these other fracture zones. Probably because that one, the Mendocino, is most related to the central current, this one, which was still, maybe not. I think this is the Mendocino here. The central current, I believe, just bends here, goes that way, and then there's like a trident arm over here and over here that the middle one is maybe more so where Mendocino is, and the far right one is more so this one up here that maybe continued over there for a short period at least. I don't know. Although that looks like it might actually connect back to there and spread out and then kind of wobble back. And it kind of goes in line with there. Okay, so there's that. Let's keep going. There's definitely a lot to go through, so I don't want to get too caught up. The most southerly of the fracture zones in the region is the Clarion fracture zone. It appears to have a simpler structure than the quiet zone fracture zones to the north, consisting of only one or two strands. So that Clarion is this one here. It's this one, I believe. Pardon me. That's right, that's right. It's this one here. This one is the Clarion. And it points back to, if we go back here, points, it's this one, goes this way. Then it kind of fades in this region. That's pretty interesting. Fades in this region. But if we look at the map, the magnetic anomaly map, follow it this way, this way, this way, and suddenly over here, it's actually relatively in line with this. So my thought is it's kind of like at a balance point where it's things up here are getting more bent, and this one is more able to just be like the trident sideways thing this way, but relating more up higher. Maybe there's I can't see it elsewhere, like especially in this region, or over here. So maybe it just doesn't even continue. I'm not sure what to make of it exactly, but the fact that it's in the center and in line with this, to me, kind of points to why it is more like they describe it as consisting of one or two strands. The southern end of Sculpin Ridge, which I believe is here. Yeah, and so it also only goes there, according to what we've seen or noticed. It has like a boundary. This is, I don't know if I've ever really looked at that. This is the main current. Which points at the Mid-Pacific Mountain Dragon nose of the dragon. Is that in the magnetic anomalies? Here, in this region. Something going on there. Pretty much in this nook, or the bend, there's this V shape, and then the currents flowing in this way to open the V shape. It was kind of flowing one continuous current that got divided by a counter current that flowed in. So like at the boundary of the V shape is this interesting feature here. I don't just noticed it, I guess. Okay. More details from Atwater et al. Of relevance that the fracture zone shapes are similar across multiple plates. So there's the Pacific plate and the Farallon plate. That let's just read it. The shapes of the various fracture zones are all quite similar from west to east, i.e. from old to young, so the older region of the fracture zone is west, and the younger is east. Although, again, if there's current going both directions, I'm not completely sure how certain that is. But in the minimum, they're like going outward from here. It might just later on take the same general path back, but be much more conducive, let's say, of seeing the west to east dating of it all. All are concave south, gradually changing trend from east-northeast to near the east, then abruptly shifting back to east-northeast at the Cron 33R bend. The similarity suggests that all were formed along transform faults of a single plate pair, the Farallon and Pacific plates, and that those two plates experienced changes in relative motion, plate motion, that were recorded simultaneously by all the transform faults. So if you think about it, what are the odds? What are the odds that multiple plates have this exact structure going through them? Through multiple plates, through multiple plates, through multiple plates, wherever the Farallon boundary is, continuously through them. If they were ancient plates that had these form within them, like, it doesn't really make sense. The plate tectonics analysis of these things that it's going across plates is kind of ridiculous. Pacific Farallon spreading, it is equally clear that the spreading was not symmetrical and continuous, but rather that the system suffered major ridge crest jumps sometime during the supercron. This is required. Several lines of evidence suggest that they occurred early in the supercron, like right when the Ontong Java Plateau et al. Were forming, and this thing was forming, and then these fracture zones started to form out of the jet streams coming out of its pole. was this early in the superchron. Similarity in the fracture zone shapes are particularly distinctive in the eastern part of the quiet zone. This shape similarity suggests that the jumps occurred in the western older part of the quiet zone. A number of topographical anomalies of unknown origin that could be results of spreading. These occur primarily in the western part of the quiet zone, so there's jumps in the western part, almost like it was, again, more firm and less malleable, so it wasn't more bending as much as fluidly bending, more just abrupt changes. The proposed timing fits with the larger observation that the Western Pacific region was the site of numerous extremely voluminous volcanic outpourings that began at the beginning of the superchron. So this superchron, when the magnetic anomalies don't change their apparent strengths, basically, or direction, is connected undoubtedly to these fracture zones forming, which is through the angel trident structure. These papers postulate, Engebretson et al. And Joseph et al. Postulate such a relationship between the Manihiki plateau volcanism and a southward jump of the Pacific Farallon Phoenix Triple Junction. For example, in general, spreading center jumps are accomplished when a new propagating rift tears off a piece of one plate, creating a microplate between it and the old established ridge. If activity on the old ridge then dies, the microplate has been transferred to the other plate and the spreading center has jumped. The extinct ridge is marked by a topographic high, while the rift propagation line, the initiation site, is a trough. Okay, let's just keep going. I was basically thinking like this is segmenting portions, but then like there's some outer portion that pushes this segment into be not specifically here, but just mousing over this region because we can see these lines, like the pushes this region in to attach it to some other region, and then the fracture zone fault line thing, the rift jumps over, and then this microplate kind of thing happens. But it's really just like probably related to bending of the current as the Earth expands. Interestingly, Necker Ridge and adjacent parallel ridges are those of Mid-Pacific Mountain, which I've described as being missing from beneath the New Madrid fault area, coupled to the Mid-Pacific Mountain, so I mentioned this. So let's just go through this real quick. Given the ambiguous origins of these features, we are left concluding only that if they were formed by ridge jumps, the jumps occurred early in the superchron. So if anything's going on in terms of some kind of jumps, as they were just describing, then it's related to early on in the superchron, like 120 million when the Ontong Java plateau was forming. One group of topographic features that does not correspond to any common explanation is the Necker Ridge and adjacent parallel ridges, which I already pointed out. These features are extremely linear, narrow, and high, and they lie oblique to the nearby Molokai fracture zone and to the seafloor topographic grain. Thus, they resemble neither common seafloor spreading features nor common superimposed volcanic features. Pretty much, in some ways they resemble, so then they go on to just kind of say cracks. There must have been some crack, but this is quite the crack. Quite the crack. Are we sure this didn't come from physically over here in this region and just slide through these openings and attach and form this like narrow needle like ridge, because it did. It was probably superimposed on aged lithosphere, so the ocean floor had already existed. So it does not impact our Cretaceous seafloor. So they're just like, it doesn't matter that much. We can kind of ignore it as we go forward. We don't really have the best explanation, but we can just ignore it. Very useful details about the Northern Pacific with regard to Kula Plate, Chinook Trough, and Emperor Trough. Spreading on the Kula Pacific boundary initiated in the Chinook Trough. Magnetic isochrones north of the trough demonstrate that Kula Pacific spreading initiated along a break that propagated west to east during Cron, when the bend happened during Cron 33R, after the supercron, breaking off a northern piece of the Pacific plate from under North America. If the Northern Emperor Trough and the Chinook Trough are assumed to have been formed as the breaks along the western and southern edge of the new Kula Plate, which is just totally an assumption because it's actually breaks of the Pacific Plate from under North America, it is possible that the Southern Emperor Trough may have been formed during the same rifting event as a third arm, or so they're just kind of hypothesizing. I'm not sure. I think I just underlined this in case. Or failed arm, similar to those formed during continental breakups. The break-off of the northern part of the Pacific Plate has important ramifications. The break would have dramatically reduced the northward pull. So they're kind of saying, like, once this break happened, the subduction has like a reduction, I guess, because they're assuming some plate tectonics and putting in a plate tectonic framework. So the pull, northward pull on the Pacific Plate from North Pacific subduction zones is reduced dramatically by this severance, which is really just that the pressure is pushing on physically. Like if we go here, this animation here, there's a current flow flowing this way that's pushing on this plate material, on the plate, the underlying layer of the Western Pacific that is physically abutting Asia. It's pushing on it, pushing it into Asia relatively, but then it breaks away. And the current flow that's here is no longer pushing on it. It's more so flowing into the Eastern Pacific, forming the Eastern Pacific. So any subduction of this material under Asia, where it's kind of sliding under Asia somewhat, into the resistance of the mantle puncture hole current, would be stopped at that point. So this subduction, any evidence of it would be dramatically reduced. Given its timing, the breakoff is the likely cause for the major change of spreading direction observed. So when this breakoff of the Pacific Plate happens, when it broke out from underneath North America, then this spreading direction change occurs, which really means that the Earth started to expand so that the direction of flow of things was changed. Our contention that the Mendocino was a fracture zone in the Pacific Farallon system implies that the region to the north of it was part of the Pacific Plate, not some other. We are firmly convinced of this interpretation because of the similarity of fracture zone shapes across the Cron 33R bend. So that was relating, like, believe, to this region up here. Right here, specifically, probably. This little wedge, which was probably conjoined up here. Like, this was probably more so over here, I guess. And then it broke away. Maybe that's where that straight portion bends. Like a current flowing across, but it's cutting through this region, but then it, so it like goes along that boundary, but then it gets past where it kind of opens the space and it bends the cutting path. I don't know. Depends on when this formed. Apparently, the relative spreading directions between plates during the formation of oceanic lithosphere can be described by rotations about Euler stage poles. And one of which is, like, I looked at all of this section, I didn't quite understand what was particularly they were getting at, but these are all possible Euler stage poles, I believe, but then SJ really caught my attention. So the rest of this is really getting away from the paper itself and into some things I noticed. So here's SJ, which is at 30,152. Here's the flame-like structure. I've discussed how the figure 8 structure of the angel induced a flame-like structure below it. Like it had this jet stream above it and then like a flame-like structure below it that physically pressed into South America at several locations as the continents were being broken apart. One location in which it especially latched into South America is this one right here. So these are all locations where the flame structure, because this location was physically under this location, which is the secondary mantle puncture hole, and then a flame, literal flame of, well, I don't know about literal, but like a flame of magma was flowing along this direction and pressuring into South America as it severed the continents apart. And it ended up specifically pressuring at this location, but it left behind a trail of like notches that it drilled into by this like flame, putting like a pressure point into South America that spread open the continents and really participated in the expansion process to get it going. And here's the SJ coordinate. The SJ coordinate, though, 30,152, that I just found curious from the paper, appears to complete a sort of cross-like structure. So here's Ontong Java Plateau, here's Hikarangi Plateau, here's Manihiki Plateau, and here's that location. Sort of like a cross-location structure. I don't know. It resembled that kind of thing to me. And I looked at this location, and a fracture zone is present. So there's a fracture zone that goes directly to this pressure point. It's present from the location of this pressure point in South America. One that can be traced and that appears to possibly have a relationship to the SJ stage point. So around which rotation occurred, so mind you, this stage point is like where rotation axis, like here's the stage point, rotation axis around it. As the Earth expanded and things changed direction, it was related to this point over there. But this point what my contention is that that point over there, the SJ3152, is actually related to this location just prior, after the fact. Like it was there. The point was here, but then it spread so that the point is now, like, appears to have been over there. So if we follow this line back, here's 3152. This line goes this way, and then it kind of fades out where it becomes more complex. But it was kind of, we can see like something going through there. I drew some red dashes. It generally approaches it to a point where I'm like, they're connected. Okay, so those are connected. How many more? We're at an hour 25. Okay. Then I noticed, okay, that pressure point, which I've noticed in the past, but it didn't, like, I didn't have all these pieces together to really find it as odd as it is. So here's the boundary of this pressure point. If we go here, these points around this pressure point are these points. So it's kind of like a circle here. It's more of like a circle than a square, but I just drew it as a circle, or as a square. Is here, so that's where it is. And I said, within this is none other than the exact location where I found a fractal trilobite. What are the odds? What could this connection mean? Fractal trilobite in the back, spine, an eyeball, another eyeball that degraded, a third eye of a heart, which is interesting. Just its head shape. On the side of a volcano, which we'll look at more. We're going to get back to some technical papers, actually. Animation, so I made an animation. Here's the pressure point. Pressure point. There's that region. Also notice up here, we're going to look at this later, but notice this pressure point is exactly where the salt flats are. I don't know how to say Uri salt flats, which is that. And then this fractured zone, this one, if we just continue it over here, like over here, Lake Titicaca. Okay, let's keep going though. So there's that. And then I just linked this. I found a trilobite. This is from October 2022, so this is over a year ago when I just found it. Here's a trilobite. And it's in this location where this thing is. Weird. What an eyeball on that thing. There's the eyeball, close up. Like, crazy. On the side of a volcano. And then this trilobite structure formed at the edge of a volcano. Here's a volcanic map of South America. Notice 30 degrees south. There's this gap. Here's a volcanic map of South America during the Quaternary. So these are more recent volcanoes. But essentially there's the northern volcanic zone, which starts just past the mantle puncture hole where current was flowing the opposite direction. And then there's this gap where there's not volcanoes in the interim, and then where the flame applied pressure, like it cut through here, but then it applied pressure through here. To here is where that pressure point is, basically. And then there's a gap. So I was like, this there is a break in the volcanism south of the pressure point region, down here, and north of here, where the flame did not reach seemingly because it got caught at this final pressure point. Like, there's not another pressure point down here, so it was like it got caught here and maybe like made a current flow along the rest of this, but it didn't continue to propagate. We can even see like the magnetic anomalies are pointing at this location, like from up here down this way to over here. So it didn't catch further, and there's not volcanoes further. There's some down there, which I don't know, didn't really try to understand, but so here's that location, Ojos del Salado region, which I found a paper of. Describes the region to have steeply dipped slab interaction with flat subduction to the south. So basically, in the region of this pressure point is deeply dipping slab beneath the Puna Altiplano plateau to the north. Volcanic activity in the greater Ojos region started around 26 million. So this pressure point seemingly was really being applied around 26 million. Radiometric dating. And then there is the transition. This Ojos del Salado volcanic region is located in the transition zone between the flat slab 28 to 33 degrees south. So further south is this flat slab subduction zone. And then north in that region is this steeply dipping slab. Here's one of their images. There's where the trilobite is Peñas Blancos. If we go over here, come over here. Here's the trilobite here. We just put layers. Peña Blanca is this one. Which is presumably what that is. Peñas Blancas. That one. So there's the trilobite, which is in apparently 4 million year radiometric dating volcanism. And then just a Wikipedia or just a Google result even. The central volcanic zone of the Andes is located between these latitudes, which is where the pressure points both start and begin. Like if we go down here and we look, here's a pressure point, here's a pressure point. If we look at this one, 14 degrees is right there. So it starts basically just above this pressure point. And then 29 degrees is right there. So it ends at the end of this, not just the point itself, but the mound around it. Basically. Ends there, starts there. Clear relationship, no doubt about it. So then I just did that. There's 29 degrees south. I just showed that. There's 14. I just showed that. And then I guess I showed this already too. Okay. Then the magnetic anomaly map appears to further suggest a rotational axis relationship of a central point just west of Mexico right here. This is almost like a compass thing. one of these. Imagine here is this point here, and then this is the location where the pressure into South America is being applied. And then there's two of them, so a wider one. It's very much got that vibe to me, at least like to a degree. Like it straightens out after it bends a bit, but and then I already mentioned this fracture zone goes to Titicaca. That's why I kind of showed that on the thing, because you can't see it in this image. I just kind of drew it. And then Uyuni pronunciation. Uyuni.
Uyuni. Uyuni.
Uyuni. Uyuni. Uyuni salt flats. Which is apparently where like 12% of the known lithium on Earth is in these salt flats. It's kind of interesting. But my thought was, like, if we keep going, there's this channel, the blue, where current was flowing under the crust of South America, and it kept going and kept going, but then it ran into what ultimately would be a mound here. Maybe it slid along here and got the pressure point really connected more so there, but still this current went through, and here's Uyuni location at the end of this. Like it's kind of surrounded by a high intensity relative magnetic anomaly that holds anything that flows down this blue path as like going down this channel, but then it stops here. I mean, it probably went over here too, but it stops here like relatively. And my thought was maybe it's just like boiling, like there's a lot of heat there that was flowing through here that created a boiling of water that for some reason was accumulating more so here at this corner to a point where it made these huge salt flats. Like, they're crazy. Look at this. Like, whoa. What is going on? Kind of looks like it was boiling too. All these bubbles. Bunch of bubbles. Almost done, almost done. This is finished. There's only a couple more. 1, 2, 3. 3 more. Okay. So then I came across this, the crustal thickness in this region of the pressure point where the flame was going. So maybe it was more like a flame of magma that solidified under the crust here and made it much thicker. Crustal thickness here than basically everywhere else on Earth except for at the Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau region. Or maybe even just the Himalayas. Where the Himalayas were fueled by current flows going down this way that then bent this way and kind of fanned out in an arc, running into the pressure of the mantle puncture hole, so it kind of created a wall next to it, and I guess made it thicker and thicker. And then I saw this. This is another Moho depth, so Same general thing going on where they're pretty much the only places on Earth that are extremely thick crust. Notice the European region's thin because the mantle puncture hole current flowed that way and just didn't solidify until it started to really heat exchange with the overlying ocean that was above North America. Before the Earth expanded, there was an ocean there. And then another oddity, I didn't know what to make of this. Most notable anomaly is the high sill over the Andes. Other major orogenies, such as the Himalayas, do not show this increased sill. This image looked kind of relevant. I just didn't know what to make of it. I have no idea what exactly it's getting at. But there's the secondary mantle puncture hole location, and there's this arc around it. As well as over here, I just didn't know what to make of it, but I just posted it. Okay, dudes, we made it. We made it through another Twitter thread. These things are long. I gotta be a little more mindful to make a video sooner than so I can not rush through the threads too much. But it's long enough, so I'll see you next time. Thanks. Got some cool stuff coming up for sure. Alright, peace.